Hey, hey, trust you guys are doing well. My name is Jeff Fuller. You can find all these interviews, Jay Fuller interviews, on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're trying to get the word out, tell people stories, and become a hero maker. Somebody that's definitely become a hero maker instead of just being the hero is the one, the only Alan Stein. Alan, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, Jeff. It's going to be nice to connect with you, my friend.
Well, it's been a while. You graciously came on my radio show, I don't know, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, something crazy like that. And at the time, you were a strength and conditioning coach. I think I have a picture. Yeah, one of the players might be a little bit glary, but this is Kevin Durant. Could you just talk about that relationship you had with him?
Yeah, and Kevin is one of the pictures behind me for anyone that's able to view our broadcast right now. Yeah, I met Kevin after his sophomore year of high school. He was actually playing at a different school, and over the off season, I had a chance to start to build a relationship with him and start to take him through some strength and conditioning workouts so that he could get stronger and bulletproof his body against injury and improve his athleticism. And our relationship continued to prosper. And then his senior year, he actually attended Montrose Christian School, which is where I was the performance coach. So Kevin and I spent many a days and many hours together in the gym and in the weight room his senior year before he left for Texas. And I could tell at that time he was a very special young man. Certainly was very gifted on the court. I mean, he had great footwork and shooting form. He had a great work ethic. He was very coachable and humble. And when we put that perfect storm together, I knew that he was going to be a special player, but I had no idea he was going to turn out to be as good as he has.
Well, Alan, you gave me one of the funniest lines when I interviewed you on radio. I asked you about his bench press during the combine before the NBA draft, and you said it turned out okay for him, and I definitely agree. What led you to that position at Montrose?
At the time, Montrose was one of two different programs here in the Washington, D.C. area that had just had national prominence, were constantly ranked in the top 10 in the United States, and had produced not only several Division I basketball players, but several NBA players. And I knew that working for a program like that and for a head coach like Stu Vetter, who had been coaching at the time as long as I had been breathing, I knew it would be a tremendous experience for me to work with elite level student athletes, but also learn from a phenomenal coach. So I spent 7 years at Montrose and loved every minute of it. And then made a leap to the other school at the time with national prominence, which was DeMatha Catholic High School, and then spent 6 years there for the exact same reasons, working for the brilliant Mike Jones. And this area has grown so much now. I mean, there are actually several programs, Paul the Six, Gonzaga. There's several other schools now that have really reached a national level. So it's a really rich environment for youth and high school basketball, and I'm incredibly thankful that I got to work at two of the best programs.
And you had opportunity to train and meet with several phenomenal players, and this is a picture of LeBron James, obviously. Was basketball your first love, or just strength and conditioning? Did that just play into the basketball athletes more so than some others?
No, basketball was definitely my first love. I fell in love with the game at probably 4 or 5 years old. And here, 4 decades later, basketball is still a major pillar in my life. But it was definitely my first identifiable passion and would just live and breathe the game through high school. And then I played in college. And as I was ending my high school career and preparing for my college career, I started to really get into the training component, the strength, the conditioning, the fitness, the performance. I wanted to improve my athleticism and my explosiveness and my vertical jump. I needed to put on muscular body weight going from high school to college. So I started to develop an equal love for the training side. And that was why when I graduated from college, I decided that I would marry my two loves, my first love of basketball and my new love of performance work, and marry those together to become a basketball performance coach, which I did for almost 15 years. And once again, loved every minute of that as well.
So let's back up even further. When you were a kid, who were the biggest influences, and did your parents push you to athletics, or is that something that you just found from friends or different mentors?
Well, both of my parents were elementary school educators. My mom was a first grade teacher for 30 years, and my father started as a teacher and then matriculated up to being a middle school principal. So I'd always had a very strong appreciation for education, for teaching, which I consider to be synonymous with coaching. And my parents didn't push me. They just provided me opportunities to try things that I wanted to try. So I really was very one dimensional as a kid. I was only interested in sports. I was only interested in anything that could expend physical energy. I never got into music. I never got into arts or dance or theater or anything like that. Everything was sport related. And I did all of the major sports, football and basketball, baseball, volleyball. But I also did a lot of the unconventional sports at the time, like skateboarding and BMX biking and martial arts. And despite trying just about everything, I just always came back to basketball. Basketball was number one for me. And I think part of that, based on my age, at 44 now, that means I really started playing the game in the early to mid 80s and up through the late 80s and 90s, is really when Michael Jordan came on the scene. And I think he just increased the sexiness and the attractiveness and how cool basketball was for anyone, probably plus or 5 years of my age. And I think that's what elevated it to an entire another level, with Michael Jordan being the primary sports endorser of the time, with his Jordan brand shoes and with Nike and Gatorade and Wheaties. I mean, he was just everywhere you turned, and he was the epitome of cool. And here's a sport that I'd already liked, and now I've kind of got this role model from afar, that I figured, yeah, this is the coolest thing ever. So yeah, basketball has always been my number one passion.
And I'm 45, and so I definitely agree with that, Jordan. It was just so cool and fun. We're going to talk about that a little bit down the road, the Last Dance. But in Vermont, where I am, and I get to coach JV athletes as well as some other students, we have the good fortune that you're able to play multiple sports, because if you're relatively athletic in this state, it does provide that opportunity. How important is it that students play multiple sports?
I've always been a huge advocate of it. I mean, I played multiple sports as a child, all the way up through high school. I have three young children now. I have 10-year-old twin sons and an 8-year-old daughter. And I encourage them to not only play multiple sports, but try multiple activities and do all of the things that I mentioned earlier that I didn't do. So I encourage them to try things above and beyond just sports. And yeah, I've long encouraged that for kids to be truly well-rounded mentally, physically, and emotionally, to not get burnt out physically, mentally, and emotionally, it's best for them to try a variety of different things. And even if, as they get older, they start to have one sport that's a clear favorite of theirs, or one sport that they have very high acumen and competence in, if they choose to kind of specialize in that one sport, maybe towards the end of high school, because they think they have an opportunity to play that game at the next level, at that time, I have no problem with it. But honestly, I think all the way up to ninth or 10th grade, kids should be trying to play and do as many different activities as possible.
And with that, when do you think students should start working out with weight? I've always been a proponent that I think high school age, just because of different things. But I've heard now of kids fifth, sixth grade starting on a weight program. Well, what are your thoughts?
Well, two things. One, there's not necessarily a blanket answer because every child's different. Every child matures physically, mentally, and emotionally at a different rate and at a different pace. You can have two 12-year-olds, and one of them has the physical maturity of a 13 or 14-year-old, and the other has the physical maturity of a 9 or 10-year-old. So you can't necessarily group them together. And the distinction to make is the difference between strength training and weight training.
Yeah, yeah.
As far as strength training is concerned, which can include body weight exercises, your push-ups and lunges and planks and pull-ups and dips. I think as soon as a child's able to control and stabilize their own body weight, they should be doing that type of strength work. And as I mentioned, I have 10-year-old twin sons and an 8-year-old daughter, and they do that type of stuff with me all of the time. Push-ups and pull-ups and lunges and plank holds and things like that. Once they've shown an absolute firm command of strength and stability of their own body, then and only then should you look to add any type of external resistance. And I would agree with you, for most kids, that's going to be around middle school or high school age when most of them are ready for that. But I've met some high school players, ninth and 10th graders, that couldn't do 10 correct push-ups, or couldn't do 3 or 4 correct pull-ups, or couldn't hold a plank position for more than 20 seconds. So even though they were in ninth and 10th grade, they were not structurally ready to start overloading their muscular system with external weights. So they shouldn't. They should just continue to strength train. So to me, that's what's most important. And, I think if a young person is able to play a sport, and kids start playing sports now at 4 or 5 years old,
Yeah.
playing a sport for the most part is running and jumping and sliding and backpedaling and doing all sorts of those types of movements. So there's nothing wrong with teaching those movements the right way through proper training. So if you're talking about a speed and mobility program, or quickness and agility, and like even fourth or fifth grade, I think is appropriate for kids to start, as long as the workouts are age appropriate and they're supervised by someone that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think CrossFit's really helped distinguish just lifting weights versus just getting stronger. Let's fast forward now to raise your game. Your parents must have been proud of being educators, but you said you switched from just focusing on sports as an adolescent to being more well-rounded. We're going to get to what you're doing now with speaking across the country, inspiring people, motivation. What caused you to write this book, and can you describe the process?
I sure will. Before I do that, I do want to make one clarification, because I may have misspoken and I don't want to mislead anyone. I believe, especially at young ages, that children should be exposed to and encouraged to try as many different things as possible. And they should be encouraged to try a well rounded suite of activities. But I think, generally speaking, in society, we overvalue well roundedness. And I
Yeah.
actually think that, and this is not the same as sports specialization, but I think as you get older, you should figure out the core things that you do really, really well, and you should figure out the things that you're the most passionate about, and then you should find out where those things intersect, and that's going to be your strength zone. And I think people should really spend more time doubling down on their strengths and their natural gifts and things they're passionate about, and less time trying to be everything to everyone and trying to be well-rounded, and trying to take something that you're not very competent in and work a lot of time and effort to become mediocre at it. I don't think is best use of our resources. So, as I got older, I realized I loved the game of basketball, and I seem to have some natural inclinations towards coaching and teaching and connecting with people and mentoring and communication. Those were things that I enjoyed, but also came fairly easily to me. So being a basketball specific strength coach was right in my strength zone. So just wanted to make sure that I'm not preaching that people should be so well rounded and try to do everything well. And one last example with that, I think if you took the average parent and their child comes home with a report card, and let's just say, for the sake of argument, they have an A in one class, they have a D in another class, and everything else is kind of in between. You have an array of B's and C's. It's my belief that most parents would spend most of their time focused on that D and saying, well, having a D is completely unacceptable. We need to get you a tutor. I need to meet with the teacher. They want to get that D up to maybe a C or a B. And I think you should take a different approach. If that was my child, I'd want to look at what they got an A in and say, I bet you they
Yeah.
like this class a lot, and I bet you they're naturally pretty good at it. Why don't I give them more reinforcement and encouragement to double down on that? If my child shows a really high competency in math, and maybe a lower one in another, well, it doesn't mean that we're going to disregard the low grade, but let's double down and let's see if we can pour everything into, in this case, math, because I think that gives them the highest opportunity to exceed and be successful. And, as long as I know that my child, if they got a D in a class, it wasn't for tardiness or absenteeism, and it
Right.
wasn't for being disrespectful. As long as they did what they were supposed to do, I'm not at all worried about making that D mediocre at best. So I know that was quite a tangent, but I want to make sure folks understand my stance on trying to be well-rounded versus doubling down on what you do really, really well.
No, and I think that's great. And I think that comes with self awareness as we mature and get older, figuring out what am I good at and how can I focus my passion? And then what are the things I'm not as good at, but I do need to improve? Or it's
Yes.
frankly a waste of time to focus on those things where I could be more productive doing the rest.
Yeah.
So,
Well, if you look, you could actually make one of those matrix, those four box, where you have four quadrants. You have things that you're really good at and you love to do. You have things that you're not so good at but you love to do. You have things that you're pretty good at but you don't love to do. And then I guess the fourth one to be, you have things that you're not very good at and you don't like doing
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Uh, Obviously, people realize, we should spend more time in that quadrant of I like and I'm good at. We should do everything we can to get rid of the I don't like and I'm not good at. But the interesting one is the other two, because to me, what's most important, if you're not very good at it, but you like it, then that is still something you can and should pursue, maybe as a hobby or an extra activity, because it brings you fulfillment and it brings you
Sure.
happiness and you enjoy it. So, you might not be a world class musician, but if you like playing the piano or the violin because it's fun and you enjoy it, then you should still go ahead and pursue it. Where people have to be very careful is the quadrant of things that they're naturally good at, but they don't like doing.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of that in the basketball space, where a kid is tall at a young age or very athletic and very coordinated. And all the adults are saying, you need to play basketball. And the kid just doesn't really like basketball. And I think we need to have a heightened awareness to eliminating as many things from that quadrant as we can, because if you don't enjoy something, it's just not worth doing. Life's too short to spend time doing things that we don't enjoy.
I agree. And Jay Billis wrote the foreword to your book, Raise Your Game. Could you just talk about this book?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I wrote the book. It came out in January of 2019, and the reason for writing the book was threefold. First reason was I've been a voracious reader my entire adult life, and I've always had such a strong respect for authors and for books, and I can look at a handful of books that really had a profound impact on my life. Where I had one perspective. I read this book and I spend some time in reflection, and then I come out on the other side with an entirely new perspective. And I thought, given all of the opportunities I've had to learn from some great high performers, if I could curate some helpful information that could raise someone's game or help them in any way in their life, I just thought that would be very fulfilling, and it'd be a nice professional bucket list item to check off. The next reason for writing it was I started writing it right when I made the leap over to the corporate keynote space. And I knew that writing the book would cause me to get hyper focused on my content, on my message, to get really organized. When I first started keynote speaking, I believe I had the raw materials to be a good speaker, but my message was kind of all over the place. It was just more
Hmm.
of this random collage of stories and lessons, and it wasn't very sequential. It wasn't very organized. There wasn't a flow. It was more as if you and I just went out to dinner one night and you just said, "Hey, Alan, tell me a bunch of stories." And that's
Yeah.
really all I did. So writing the book, which is in alignment with the keynotes that I give now, really forced me to get my message organized and crystal clear. And then the last reason for writing the book was it helped get me some credibility in the corporate space, because I had none at that time. I was making a leap from basketball, where I'd spent my entire life and built up a fairly decent resume and brand in basketball. And then I was taking a leap over to the other side, of the corporate side, where I had no name recognition and no credibility. And I knew that writing a book would help that. So for those three reasons, writing a book made sense. I enjoyed every minute of that process, and I'm still having a lot of fun today, sharing the book and promoting it and trying to put it in the hands of people that I believe it would help.
And so I love how it says, raise your game, high performance secrets from the best of the best. Who are some of the best that you learned from just with the triangle or the pyramid? I think of John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. Who are the biggest influences in your life that helped you become the man you are, but also helped you develop this book?
Well, I mean, it's been a vast number of people. I mean, certainly starting with my parents, in some way, shape, or form, every coach that I've ever played for, from being little and playing kind of in the little leagues, all the way up through college, every coach I've ever played for had a profound impact on me. Now, some had a positive impact and me learning new traits and skills that I would eventually want to emulate as a coach, and others, quite respectfully, had the opposite impact. They
Sure.
showed me how I didn't want to be as a coach or didn't want to be as a
Yeah.
leader, and both were invaluable. So, and that list is a mile long. But then, as I mentioned, I worked at Montrose Christian for Coach Stu Vetter, and I worked at DeMatha Catholic High School for Coach Mike Jones. Both of those guys were incredibly influential, not just in my life, but for me really developing my coaching philosophy and coaching convictions. And then having an opportunity to work some events for Nike and Jordan Brand and USA Basketball, and spend some time around and observing guys like LeBron James and Kobe Bryant and Steph Curry and KD and Kyrie and Anthony Davis. Just being around those types of guys certainly had a huge impact. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call them mentors because we didn't have that type of relationship, but considering that they're the highest performers in the game of basketball, for me to simply be a fly on the wall and observe them behind the curtains had a huge impact. And then on top of that, you throw in, I've got a bookshelf over here just riddled with books and authors and people that I've never met
Yeah.
that have still helped shape my life and shape my philosophy. And I think if you put all of those people together, it's kind of this perfect cocktail of people that have helped mentor me, support me, provide opportunities, and care for me to get to where I am today.
I certainly agree with that. And it's good to have those long distance mentors that they don't know they impacted you, but you certainly know their influence. Behind me, there's a picture of several professional NBA players. If we could just talk a little bit about sports right now,
Sure.
this COVID-19 quarantine, it's different. And I was so amazed, I guess. Your Instagram post this morning about your daily routine. How important is it for you to be consistent and calculated even during this time of uncertainty?
Well, I'm a big believer that routines and disciplines and schedules and consistency are important all of the time. But I think they become even more important during a time of crisis or adversity or uncertainty. There's so much going on with COVID-19 that we have zero control over. And that means we need to focus and double down on the things that we do have control over, which for the most part is simply our own attitude and our own effort. We can't control what's going on. We can't control that we're being told to quarantine or social distance. We can't control everything with that. But what we can control is how we respond to that. And for me, I've always found comfort in routine, and I've always found comfort in consistency. So one of the ways that I can kind of battle, the crisis that we're in is by focusing even more on creating a routine. And thankfully for me, it hasn't had to change my routine that much. I mean, I had a very solid morning routine and evening routine before, and I've pretty much kept those intact. Now, what has changed for me is, I was used to giving one or two keynotes or workshops a week. So I'm doing, anywhere from 4 to 8 a month.
Hmm.
And I haven't done that in the last 6 weeks. And it doesn't look like I'll do that again at least for another 6 to 8 weeks. So my normal weekly schedule of hopping on a plane, flying somewhere, jumping on stage, speaking, and coming home, that part's been eradicated. So
Sure.
now when I have those times during the day, I'm trying to make those as efficient and as effective as possible to make sure that I can both take time to reflect and enjoy this downtime, but at the same time lay a foundation and be prepared, because at some point things are going to open back up. This pendulum's going to swing in the other
Yeah.
direction, and I want to make sure that I'm not only ready, but I'm an even better version of myself than I was when this whole thing started. And that's been a goal of mine. And I know that the only way I can emerge as a better version of myself is if I stick to a routine of discipline and habits.
And there's something that I've found with professional athletes, high performers like yourself, is that you've learned a long time ago that the crisis does not make the person's already made for the crisis. And just looking at these NBA players, top performers, athletes, just switching gears a little bit, the NBA, do you like the change that's taking place with the 3 point shot, with so much focus on uh, the analytics of the game? Do you think that helps keep people more engaged, or do you think just being raw athletes might be better for the game?
Uh, it's a little bit of both. I mean, I absolutely love the NBA. I think today's players are more athletic, more skilled, and have higher IQs than any other time before this. And that is not by any means a slight on the players that played before. I think your Michael Jordans and Magic Johnsons and Larry Birds would be just as successful today as they were, 20, 25 years ago. They were the best at their craft then, but I think the game has become so elevated now that it is a global game. Every country now plays basketball, and players in the NBA are coming from all four corners of the globe. And it's an incredibly cerebral game. The game is played at a faster pace than it's ever been played. The players are, in fact, statistically more explosive and bigger and stronger. I mean, when you just look at the sheer size of some of these guys, especially from a position standpoint, I mean, it's not unusual now to have someone 6'10, 6'11,
Yeah.
240 pounds be a perimeter player. And that person would have absolutely been a back to the basket center 25, 30 years ago. So I think the game has evolved. I love the 3 point shot. I love that they do take a cerebral approach and they study the analytics and figure out, where is the highest percentage shots for us and for each player. And then how can we force the defense to take lower percentage shots? Yeah, I think the game is is absolutely incredible. But we also have to remember, respectfully, that while it is a sport, it's also entertainment. As far
Yeah.
as making money, it's about entertainment. And offense sells tickets. They want to see high scoring games. Fans want to see stars stay in the games. So I think that's why a lot of the rules changes have been in the favor of the offensive player and stars. One of the things, and I know you mentioned the Last Dance docuseries. You just go back to the mid '90s and you watch the physical beating that Michael Jordan took every time he went to the basket. Whereas today, most of those could even be considered flagrant ones, or
Yeah.
players would get ejected, or he probably would shoot 10 to 12 more free throws today than he shot back then. And given he was a pretty, lethal free throw shooter, I mean, he could have added 8 to 10 points per game to his average just on these rule changes alone, and hand checking. I mean, back then, you could literally get a saddle and ride somebody. And now, if you put your hand on them or breathe on them wrong, they're going to call a foul. So the rules changes have been in favor of keeping stars in the game and letting teams score lots and lots of points, which is what people want to see. And I have no problem with it. So I actually really, really enjoy the NBA now, but I certainly loved it back then too.
So let's get into the weeds a little bit because I love basketball junkie. I always found it humorous, and I was a Magic Johnson fan growing up, but how Pat Riley always complained about the Celtics being dirty and rough, and even the Pistons, until he went to New York, and then that was a style that they played. When you look at coaches switching their styles for their team, I think it's wise, but can they come across a little hypocritical?
Now, I think a coach should always coach to the players that they have. I think coaches should have some very strong convictions and core beliefs on how they believe the game should be played. And those core beliefs and things that they should, their style, if you will, more than likely won't change very much. A perfect example, you take somebody like John Calipari and Kentucky Wildcats. They're always going to play a very quick, fast, up and down type of game. They want to get a lot of possessions and score a lot of points in transition. And Coach Calipari is without question one of the best college coaches of all time. Then you go on the other side, you take someone like Tony Bennett at Virginia, who has the exact opposite philosophy. He wants to slow the game down. He wants to play set defense. He wants to limit possessions and keep the score in the 50s or 60s. And he'll also be a Hall of Fame coach. I mean, I guess he's currently the reigning champion, since we couldn't crown a champion this past year. And they both play very distinctly different styles because that's what they believe in. But above and beyond that, I think both of those coaches are open to making changes based on personnel. If one of them were to recruit the best 3-point shooter in the country, my guess is they would probably take more threes that season than they had in 3 seasons past. Or, if they had a more athletic and longer team, that might change some of the things that they do and the ways that they do them on defense. So I think it's about having conviction in what you believe in, but always coaching to your team. If you believe, let's just say now you're a high school coach and you don't have any control over your personnel because you're at a public school. So whoever comes to your school is who you coach. And you believe in a fast-paced full court type game where you're going to full court press the other team for 32 straight minutes, but this year's class isn't very athletic and isn't very fast, then you may need to rethink that. Because if you're going to force players to do something that they're not very good at, then you're going to end up with a little bit of trouble. So I could see why in that case you might say, hey, we're going to have a slightly different style based on my personnel. And so I have no problem if you have big, strong physical players playing a big, strong physical style. And if you have very quick and sleek and players that run and shoot, then that's the style you should play as well.
Well, for sure. Who was your favorite player growing up?
Oh, Michael Jordan, without question. I mean, I always had a very strong respect for Larry Bird and Michael Jordan. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, because of what they were able to do. But Michael just kind of took everything to a whole new level. So, and then as I got older, it started as I had a chance to start working with players that eventually went to college and play in the pros. Then certainly my opinion started to sway towards guys that I had relationships with, and I'll always root for them. So from a college standpoint, I'm a Duke basketball fan. Been a Coach K fan for my entire adult career. But outside of that, even in the NBA, I don't really have a team. I just root for certain players and certain coaches that I hope do well.
Now, who would you say would be the top 3 in-game NBA dunkers of all time?
Vince Carter, Michael Jordan, Um, man, in game, Sean Kemp.
I was going to say either Sean Kemp or Dominique Wilkins. So,
Yeah, Dominique
um,
was pretty great. And that's not to take anything away from today's players. I mean,
no, not at
Aaron
all.
Gordon is a phenomenal in-game dunker. LeBron is a phenomenal in-game dunker. So is Russell Westbrook. I mean, what these guys can do, it's so fascinating because I think we have such high expectations for dunks now that that the bar is so high that things players do today, we're not even that impressed with. And they're
Right.
things that people couldn't even do 30 years ago. I mean, when you look at, I mean, I'm an old school guy. I mean, I still think that, the Michael Jordan Dominique dunk contest was the best ever. I thought Spud Webb was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. But when you look at what guys like Aaron Gordon now are doing in dunk contests, I mean, it is absolutely absurd. And that just speaks to what I said earlier about how the overall size, athletic ability, and explosiveness has gone up significantly in the last 30 years.
Well, for sure. And as basketball's evolved, so have you in going from basketball to now being in the corporate scene as well. But something that's come with that is your podcast. I love podcasts. Raise Your Game Show with Alan Stein Jr. I listen on Google Podcasts. But could you just share about that interaction you had with Kobe Bryant, where he asked you to show up for a shoot around or a practice he was doing, a workout, and just tell that story a little bit about that experience with Kobe.
Well, what I'll do, I'll just kind of give the Cliff Notes version of it, and then I've actually got a video of it that will do a much better job than me telling it right now. And at the end, I can give folks a verbal link that they could go check it out. But
Oh, great.
yeah, it was during the off season, and Kobe was going for a super early morning workout, and I arrived super early, but not quite as early as he did. And I just remember being blown away watching him at the simplicity of the drills he was doing. He was doing a lot of footwork and offensive moves drills. The first few minutes, he didn't even use a ball. It was all about pivoting off of either foot and squaring up to the basket. And I just remember being blown away that at that time, the best player in the world was doing such basic drills. I expected, very naively so, I expected to go in there and see him doing a lot of flash and a lot of sizzle and some really out of the box drills. And instead, he was just hammering home on the fundamentals and the basics. And when I asked him about it later that day, that was kind of the phrase that has stuck with me for the rest of my life. I asked him, why he was the best player in the world doing such basic drills. And he basically said, well, that's why I'm the best player in the world, because I never get bored with the basics. And that's really the foundation of everything that I speak on. It's the foundation of Raise Your Game. It's not getting bored with the basics and trying to pursue mastery of the fundamentals during the unseen hours. That really is the foundation to which the rest of the house is built. And it has such high utility because it doesn't matter what you're trying to improve in. You could be trying to improve free throw percentage. You could be trying to improve your ability to play the piano. You could be trying to study for a geometry test. You could try to become a better parent, whatever it may be. The key to being good in any of those things is mastering the basics and the fundamentals of what it takes to be good in that thing and not skipping over them. So for me, that was an epiphanal, life-changing moment for me when the best player in the world said, yeah, I never get bored with the basics.
Where were you when you learned of the tragic death of Kobe Bryant?
I was actually sitting right here at the same desk that I'm recording with you right now. It was actually a Sunday, and I usually don't do very much work on Sundays, but my kids were over. It was a rainy day here in the DC area. They were all kind of playing on their iPads. They had earned some screen time, and I was just trying to knock a few things off my to-do list in my office. And I got a text that said, "Did you hear about Kobe?" And then I got another text and another text. And within about 15 minutes, I probably got 25 texts that all said the same thing. And at that point, I hadn't heard anything because I was locked into the work I was doing. So I immediately pulled up ESPN.com and they had started to allude towards the story. And then, as most people probably remember, it was kind of slow at first, but then within about an hour or two, every major news outlet had confirmed that and had said that. But yeah, it was crazy because the first couple texts, I'm like, what are y'all talking about? And then I was like, okay, there's something to this. So yeah, it was definitely one of those visceral moments where I remember exactly what I was doing, where I was, and how I felt.
And how did you feel a week or so after he died? I know for me, it was just a surreal experience of watching this great athlete, and I didn't feel like I should be affected that much, but I was. What about yourself?
Yeah, I was affected, particularly as a father. I mean, certainly we lost an icon, we lost a role model, we lost a hero. But my heart immediately went to the fact that he was a father, and without sounding too morbid, I can't even imagine being with one of my children when something like that's about to happen and feeling so helpless that I can't protect them or help them. So, the last few seconds of how he must have felt with Gianna in that helicopter, I mean, really shook me and had a very profound effect on me. And then, of course, he leaves behind a wife and other children, and now they're going to have to grow up without a husband and without a father. And when I put myself in that place and think of, if my children had to grow up without me, that just it makes me sad. Not because, like, I mean, not for any selfish reasons, but more of I realize how influential a father can be to young people, and I want to be around as long as I can to support and love my children until they're adults themselves. So that was on one hand. Then on the other hand, that story that I just gave the Cliff Notes version of is my number one signature story that I
Mhm.
start every single keynote with and every single workshop with. For the last 4 years, it's how I've opened up every single event that I've ever done, because it's a great story to draw people in, and it sets that foundation for the rest of my talk about mastering the fundamentals. And as crazy as it is, I actually had a keynote at 10 a.m. the following day. I mean, less than 24 hours after they announced his death, I had a keynote that Monday, and I actually had two more speaking events that week. So then I was shifting to thinking, okay, do I still open up with this story? And if I do, how do I put it into a new context? Do I? So there was a little bit of confusion on what would be the most appropriate and most respectful way to take something like that on. And thankfully, the adjustments I make, I felt were very well received. I think people appreciated the story even more given what had just happened.
Sure.
And I think I did 6 more events within the 2 weeks following his passing. So it was definitely interesting. And what I found kind of cool, I mean, it speaks volumes to Kobe that he had such an impact on the world, not just on basketball players, but
Yeah.
people that didn't even like or watch basketball knew of him and had a respect for him. But it was kind of neat for me. I started getting tons of texts, emails, and social DMs of people that say, hey, Alan, you spoke to our company last year, and I'll never forget that Kobe story. I'm
Hmm.
sorry for your loss. And I didn't personally lose a lot, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful
Sure.
way, but
Sure.
it's not like he and I were BFFs or really close friends, so I didn't personally lose a lot. But I really felt the love and the appreciation that, one, that story had impact on other people when I told it. So I think I was paying tribute to his legacy, but that people cared enough to reach out to me, knowing that I did have a relationship with him and wanted to make sure that I was okay. So there was a silver lining in that for sure.
And now you alluded to it, but you travel around and speak a ton and just share your story and try to help other people. I completed a book. It's called Hero Maker. And I just love the premise that too often people want to be the hero, but I think we need to be hero makers. When you speak and somebody comes back and you just see that they had an epiphany, that some of the fundamentals just led to life change for them, does that give you, or what type of satisfaction does that give you?
Oh, that makes me feel phenomenal. I mean, the my number one mantra as a speaker is the exact same it was when I was a coach, which is it's not about me, it's about you. And of course, in this case, the you is the audience. So everything that I say on stage, I'm saying to benefit or add value to the audience. I'm not just up there saying what I want to say. I'm saying what I believe would be most helpful for them based on the due diligence and research and homework that I've done for that specific event or for that specific audience. So yeah, it's as a speaker, I don't want to be the hero up there. All I want to do is kind of be the conduit to sharing messages that I think will help other people. And yes, I don't know of a more fulfilling feeling in the world than when you're speaking and you look out and you see somebody's eyes light up or their head nod, or even they look down
Yeah.
immediately to their notepad and they start scribbling furiously, or they come up after and say something like, man, that was a great reminder for me to do A, B, and C. I love when people come up and say, man, that was really helpful for me. But boy, that would also be very helpful for my teenage son. I'm going to go home and tell him some of those stories too. And that just shows that those messages have high utility. And that is the best feeling in the world.
Okay, so we're going to finish with the last dance. A few questions for you. Who would you take, Horace Grant from the first Bulls three-peat or Dennis Rodman, and why?
Dennis Rodman, without question. I'm a huge Rodman fan. I mean, certainly his off the court shenanigans and antics, I think, were a little bit much for my taste. But I always felt he was a consummate teammate. Now, many could say that his off the court antics kind of took the spotlight away from his teammates, and that they think that that was acting in a selfish way, that he always wanted the limelight off of the court. But I really believe, and I think the documentary does a good job of emphasizing, I think he would do anything for his teammates. I know that he was always willing to do the dirty work. You're talking about a guy who was undersized and yet led the NBA in rebounding for several years in a row. He was a tremendous defender, arguably the best on the ball defender that we've ever seen. He would set screens. He would dive for loose balls. He would take charges. He would do everything that the team needed him to do to win. And I think what epitomizes him the most is he's the guy that you absolutely hate to play against, and you loathe him if he's on one of the other 29 teams, but you absolutely adore him and love him if he's on your team. And I think that's what just makes him special. But that's no offense to Horace Grant. Horace Grant was a phenomenal player and a great puzzle piece for that first Bulls trilogy.
And my wife is from Michigan, and so I always talk about Bill Laimbeer being that player that you love to hate unless he's on your team. And my wife, obviously, she thinks he's the best player ever, which I find amusing. Hey, Scottie Pippen, the second three-peat, how would you rank him as far as top players in the NBA at that time?
Well, at that time, he was definitely a top 5 player without question. And I think he certainly earned the right now, even looking back over time. I mean, he might be a top 25 player of all time because he was so versatile. He could shoot, he could score, he could make plays, he could rebound. He was also a great defender. People just forget, he was always the number 2 guy because of Jordan. And I think sometimes we forget that we pay more homage to someone that was the number 1 guy on their team, like a Reggie Miller, who respectfully never won anything or never, he's still a great player and he was an NBA all-star, but, I think it's easy to think, well, Reggie was the best player on his team, so he was probably better than Pippen. And I don't think that's true. I think being the number 2 player when the guy in front of you is the best player of all time, people just forget how good you are. But yeah, Scottie Pippen is and was just absolutely remarkable.
And I heard an interview with Scottie Pippen. He said that he was more the prototype of LeBron James before LeBron James than the comparisons to Michael Jordan. Would you agree with that? Or do you think, can you compare Scottie Pippen to another player?
It's hard to compare any players. I can see why. I think people would say that because Scottie was a taller player who could play every position. He could play a point guard if you needed him to handle the ball and make plays. He could certainly get down and post you up. He could play from the wing. But even LeBron, I think, is a whole nother level because LeBron's even bigger and stronger and may even have slightly better skill sets in some areas. Once again, this is not to knock Pippen. He's an all-time great. I think LeBron might be a slightly better shooter now, and I think he's a better passer, and he's just physically a little bigger. He's probably 30 pounds heavier than Pippen was, which makes LeBron an absolute freight train. But I do my best. I know it makes for fun conversation, and I know why they do it on ESPN, but it's really hard to compare players, especially of those different eras. As I mentioned earlier, the biggest change is in the rule changes. If Scottie Pippen played today, he'd probably average another, 10 points the same way I think Michael Jordan would have. But in the same vein, if you could pick up LeBron James and take him back 30 years, he would have got accustomed to the rougher play as well, and he would have been just fine.
Sure.
I think great players would be great players in any era, but it is really hard to compare kind of the pre-2000s to the post-2000s.
So a couple more questions, then we'll get you out. Thanks again for making so much time and being
Sure.
a part. Kevin Durant, you have a relationship with him. Have you spoken to him? How is the Achilles? Any information?
No, I haven't talked to Kevin in a while. I would say in this past year, I text him maybe every couple months, and I'm pretty sure he gets the text, but he doesn't necessarily respond. And I'm okay with that. I've been around him before, and I'm not exaggerating. In the course of a meal, like we go out to dinner, if he doesn't check his phone at the end of dinner, he'll have 200 or 300 text messages, and that's for a number that's not
Yeah,
really out
yeah.
in the public. So I can't even imagine how many people hit him up on a daily basis. So I almost every text I send him, I preface it with, don't feel like you need to respond. Just know that I'm watching this and I'm rooting for you, or I'm proud of you, or I'm sorry about your injury. I'm wishing you well in recovery, or, you're my kid's favorite player, just something like that. And I don't need or want anything from him in return. I just want to try and constantly, fill his bucket and make sure he knows that I'll always value him and our relationship, and that I'm always rooting for him.
Definitely. Hey, so when you look at your kids, what's a balance between pushing them and just letting them experience life and growing up and enjoying adolescence?
I do very little pushing. If anything, what I would say is I do a lot of modeling, which is I simply live my life by my core values and principles. And I do that very openly in front of my children in hopes that that will be something that they emulate one day. So I don't have a long discussion with my children about the importance of being respectful to other people. I just make sure that they see that I'm always respectful to other people. If it's a waitress or someone at the valet or someone like that, I mean, I treat that person the way that I would hope my children would treat that person when they're a little bit older. My kids see how hard I work at my craft, and that, yes, sometimes I have to miss some of their events or games because I'm traveling, but I'm doing what I love. As they've gotten older, I've started to bring them to some of my events so they can watch. So I don't push my kids in anything. I model the behavior I want to see, and then I support and encourage them. If any of them ask me, hey, daddy, I want to get better at basketball. Can you help me? Then I'm happy to help them, but it never, ever comes from me. They have to be the one that shows the initial spark.
And the last question I'll get you out on, kind of restating what you've been saying throughout the interview, is the transition you made from basketball to corporate life. Um, a lot of kids or people I run into, they put all of their eggs in one basket and they don't think that they will be able to evolve to something different. What advice would you give them?
Well, I think what's most important is just working on skill sets and skill sets that have the highest utility. So, for someone like myself, I'm constantly working on my ability to communicate. I'm working on my ability to lead and to influence others. I'm working on, things that I believe will have high utility in anything that I could do. That way, I can constantly reinvent myself if necessary. So, instead of just putting all your eggs in one basket, as in activity, I think what you should do is try to get better at skills that are valuable in almost any activity or any vocation. I mean, there's not an industry in the world right now that can't use good leadership. So if you have the qualities of an effective leader, and you have vision, and you're an optimist, and you can pour into others and fill their buckets, and you care about people, and you can articulate your message, and you can communicate and actively listen, like having high emotional intelligence and self-awareness is probably the number one thing everyone should be working on, because it doesn't matter if you're a JV soccer player or you're the CEO of a Fortune 100 company. Having an improved sense of self and an improved emotional IQ will help you in both of those endeavors. So my recommendation for young people is work on the skill sets and mindsets that have high utility, because you don't necessarily know where you're going to be in 5 years or what you want to be doing in 20 years. So you might as well double down on the things that you know will be helpful and useful no matter what you choose.
Oh, so good. Alan, thanks so much for making the time. Wish you all the best, and we'll get you back on again. Enjoy this time, stay safe, and just have fun with the rest of your family.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeff. You have a great day too.
All right. Again, that's Alan Stein, and you've been listening to Jay Fuller Interviews, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Trust you guys are well. We have some more great interviews. You can subscribe, you can share with your friends, some of the best, and we look forward to talking with you soon. All right. Have a great one.